Welcome to Isla Esperanza, Georgiana. I trust you had a pleasant journey.
Thank you, Mr. Navarro. The trip was all right, just a bit wobbly. Truth be told, the luggage took quite a beating. I'm a bit concerned that the gift I brought you might not still be in one piece. I need my...
Is everything all right?
I think I've lost the key to my luggage.
Oh, well, why don't we go look for it? If you dropped it somewhere on the island, I'm sure we can find it.
Don't be silly, Mr. Navarro. Who knows how long that might take? All I need is a couple of minutes and a bobby pin. Feels like... Georgiana.
That's lovely, Georgiana.
I figured you'd appreciate a little reminder of London.
Thank you. In my college days, I used to call my family from a booth just like this. I'll be sure to find a nice place for it.
I hope it'll suit this fancy mansion. Has it been your residence for long?
Getting close to 8 years now. As you can see, the place needs urgent renovations. A massive storm hit us a couple of weeks ago. It caused some serious damage. Thankfully, the renovations are due to be completed next month, right on time to welcome our guests.
Who are you expecting?
Famous celebrities and scientists, to mention a few.
Wow, sounds like a fancy dinner party.
Oh no, nothing that extravagant.
I'll make sure I'm up to speed with my duties by then. Can't have you looking shabby in front of the guests, after all.
No need to put so much pressure on yourself, Georgiana. Take it one step at a time.
Why is he so kind to someone like me? Seems too good to be true. Oh, don't you worry, Mr. Navarro. I do my best work under pressure. For me, it's just a matter of being prepared. So, how many guests are we expecting?
At this stage, only Dr. Catherine Bennett and Janet Lim have confirmed their attendance.
Wait, are we talking about Dr. Cat, the astrophysics scientist, and Miss Lim, the novelist?
Indeed. They are among my dearest friends.
Oh my. Some of the most influential people of the year will be visiting us. How exciting. Do you mind if I ask you? How did you end up meeting Miss Lim? Her novels were my only escape from the reality of my previous job.
You certainly weren't alone. It's a well-known fact that Janet's readers frequently get totally immersed in her worlds. But when I met her back at Stanford, she was yet to become the best-selling author she is today. At the time, I was researching alchemy practices during the Middle Ages and needed a mentor. My coordinator recommended Janet as the best expert on medieval studies on the campus.
I guess her knowledge ended up being used in more than just her novels.
Absolutely. Janet was a magnificent researcher and a patient mentor. We had a lot in common. I vividly remember the long hours we spent talking in the university cafe.
Birds of a feather flock together, don't they?
Indeed, they do. Meeting up with Janet at the cafe turned into a tradition for us. As a matter of fact, in that same cafe, I got to read the manuscript for Janet's first novel.
The Magician of the Constant. You're very lucky, Mr. Navarro.
I guess I am. To this day, Janet still sends me all her manuscripts to review.
Oh my. Any chance you could let me take a look at them too?
I'd be happy to show them to you, but not without Janet's approval. I can introduce you to her next month. We'll talk about it then.
Marvelous. I look forward to the party. But I'm a bit worried, Mr. Navarro. Won't your guests mind someone like me cleaning their rooms?
They trust my judgment and know that I only hire people I have faith in. Besides, you've already paid your debts to society.
Paid in full, plus extra, if you ask me.
I imagine your time spent locked away was a harsh experience.
That was the most wicked time I have ever experienced. The mark prison left on me is something that I'll never forget.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Don't get me wrong, Mr. Navarro. I deserved that punishment. I just hoped for a fresh start after prison, but it wasn't that simple. People tend to dwell on the past.
It's irrational how society can often be less forgiving than the law itself.
Oh, people didn't care if I'd already paid for my wrongdoings. The judgment never stopped. No one would give me a job. Yet everyone called me a layabout for not working. A paradox, if you ask me. It was only thanks to my sister that I managed to get a housekeeping position at the Anglican boarding college. But even that didn't last long.
Because of him, right?
Yes, Nigel Warren. That scoundrel blackmailed me into resigning and going to work for him instead.
Such a rotten individual. I can't forgive him for what he did to you and my employees.
So many have suffered at the hands of that monster. It was such a relief when I finally got away from him. I guess I owe that to you, Mr. Navarro. There's no need for secrecy. I know it was you who freed me from Nigel's grasp.
After what you did for me, Georgiana, I felt obliged to.
Please, that's nothing compared to whatever miracle you had to pull off to get me out. I bet it's quite a story, though. I'd love to hear it one day.
Why not today? But it would be better if we continued our conversation inside. Before we continue, would you like some tea, Georgiana?
Yes, please. Mind if I help myself?
Be my guest.
Now let's give it a stir. I've already...
Now, back to what we were discussing. How much do you know about your former employer?
More than I'd like to. I was forced to manage some of the fronts of his despicable business. I was tasked with overseeing all the drug smuggling to London. And I fetched the profits from his shady partners. I even shook down local businesses for him.
I'm afraid that the rackets you were involved in were only a small part of Nigel Warren's business. His influence goes much further than the streets of London.
That makes sense. That wretch had secrets he wouldn't share with his own shadow.
Warren had a hand in schemes to extort huge corporations around the country. My company didn't elude his greedy fingers either. He demanded a hefty sum for security fees to ensure the safety of my shipments.
It's the way he operates. I've seen him extort people hundreds of times. In the end, all local businesses give in to Nigel's demands. He can be really persuasive. I remember there was an owner of a pizza place who dared to cross him. The poor man's body was found shoved inside his own oven. It wasn't a pretty sight, I'll tell you that much.
I'm fully aware of what Warren is capable of. I got a bitter taste of it when he orchestrated the murder of my staff. Last month, I suffered the consequences of my choices. The drivers who were killed were called Rob Mitchell and David Charles. Both were young and full of potential.
It was all over the news. It's so sad to see when such young men die.
The police concluded their deaths were an accident. I couldn't believe that.
When Nigel is involved, cases don't stay open for long. The police have been in his pocket for years.
Since no one would lift a finger against him, I decided to bring Warren to justice on my own. I had to hit him where it hurt most. His international money laundering network.
Weren't you worried that Nigel might retaliate?
I admit, I was concerned for the safety of the rest of my employees. But I'd never have forgiven myself for letting Rob's and David's murders go unpunished.
So, you took the law into your own hands?
I confronted the businessmen Warren was laundering money for and threatened to expose their operations.
The fact that you're still breathing is nothing short of astonishing, Mr. Navarro. You don't mess with that kind of people without consequences.
In case something happened to me, I had loyal employees who were ready to publish the evidence. I, however, was willing not to leak my findings on one condition. Nigel Warren had to confess to murdering my employees in public. How his clientele would make that happen was left up to them.
I doubt anyone can convince Nigel to do that.
Convince him? Perhaps not. But coercing him, on the other hand.
Are you suggesting those people would have gone after Nigel's head if he'd refused?
That would have been the most logical outcome. Warren ran their entire money laundering network. He was their biggest liability. If he talked, it would be more than just their operation that would go down.
Sounds like you extorted Nigel's clients. There's no doubt he deserved it. But I would never have expected that from a respectable citizen like you.
I did what was necessary to put that murderer behind bars.
So, has Nigel confessed to murdering your drivers?
He did, last night. while you were on the plane.
Oh my! Finally, that animal will get what he deserves. I hope he rots in prison.
So do I.
Now it makes sense why he was so ticked off at the Royal Gala dinner last week.
I met Warren that night to talk about his client's demands. You should listen to your clientele, Nigel.
Look at you, Navarro. You sound like a puppy yelping. You have no place among the big dogs. So, be a good pup, and don't pick a bone with me. Or I'll have 100 more of your people buried.
You don't scare me, Warren. Expect to see your name in the headlines tomorrow morning.
You think you can threaten me, boy? Me? I'll teach you some respect.
Pull yourself together, you savage!
Know your place!
Go ahead. Do it again. Let the cameras get a good shot this time.
Consider yourself lucky, Navarro. We're leaving.
After that night, I couldn't allow myself to leave you at his mercy. I pushed Warren's clientele not just to draw a confession out of him, but also to secure your immediate release. It didn't take him long to come knocking at my door. In return for my silence, he confessed and set you free.
So that's why he let me go, after so long. It was a relief when Nigel said I was officially out of the family business.
Family? Are you telling me you're related to Warren?
My late father's birth name was Robert Warren. He was Nigel's cousin, which makes Nigel a relative of mine.
I had no idea.
That's why Nigel was forcing me to work for him. He wanted to keep the family together. What a joke.
That's hardly surprising, given Nigel's twisted mentality.
As my dad used to say, you can't choose your family.
Was Robert involved in any of Warren's dirty businesses?
A long time ago, but thankfully, Dad walked away from it. Otherwise, my mother never would have married him. Having a crook for a husband was too shameful for her. Mum could be awfully strict, to say the least.
And did your parents succeed in cutting ties with your father's family?
I wish they had. Dad even changed his surname to avoid being associated with his relatives. But they kept trying to pull him back into their nest of vipers. Throughout my childhood, Nigel and the others repeatedly showed up at our doorstep. They used to offer my dad money and expensive gifts, expecting to win him over. He was afraid that they'd sweep his little girls into that sordid world. Dad wouldn't let Nigel, or anyone else for that matter, come within an inch of my sisters and me.
It's only natural for a father to protect his children.
His fear, however, slowly turned into paranoia. Dad started believing that every single one of our neighbors was a spy sent by the family. He became very violent toward anyone who dared come too close to us.
And did his aggression extend to your family?
No, never. But my father was unraveling. We were all petrified, watching him turn into something we didn't recognize. One evening, he simply lost control, and our neighbor bore the brunt of his outburst. Dad put the man in a wheelchair, just because he thought that poor soul was an enforcer sent by his relatives. I honestly don't know what got into him. The booze, the paranoia? God, what a mess he was. It pains me to say it, but he deserved all the prison time he got.
How old were you when your father wound up in jail?
I was only 9, but my sisters, Clemency and Mildred, were even younger. None of us were ready to face the world without a father, but somehow we managed. By the time he was released, I was already 13. By that point, we didn't need him anymore.
Robert never reached out to you after getting out of prison?
Oh, he tried, but none of us wanted to see him. We resented him. A father is supposed to protect his family, not leave them with nothing. It took us a long time to forgive Dad, unlike our mother, who never did. He stopped existing to her the moment he got locked up.
Well, as harsh as it sounds, she must have had her reasons to give up on your father.
However, she had neither the right nor any justification to project her hatred for him onto us, his daughters. At first, it was merely a slap for every harmless error we committed. But it eventually escalated. Her beatings grew in frequency and intensity. I don't know if she saw it as discipline or merely as a release for her pent-up emotions. But it was clear that Mum had gone off the rails. She'd become unrecognizable.
That all sounds horrible, Georgiana. Do you think any of it has affected how your life has turned out?
To a certain degree, yes. But the wrong decisions I made were mine alone. As a teenager, I was invited to join a gang and was stupid enough to accept.
The world of crime has its allure. I saw many of my childhood friends give in to its temptations. They were only seeking better lives, but all they did was waste their futures.
Sounds familiar. Back then, I dreamed of joining a local gang. They seemed to have it all. Fancy clothes, posh food, and luxurious flats. I wanted what they had. But everything comes at a cost. By joining the gang, I lost my family. My mum, she disowned me. I stopped existing to her just like my father did.
Did you ever try to reconnect with her?
I didn't bother. To that heartless woman, I was nothing but a failure. Or, in her own words, a rotten apple she wanted nowhere near her good daughters. That was pretty high and mighty for someone who used to send her children to beg for money.
Despite your mother's shortcomings, she was still family. It must have been hard being kicked out of your own home.
I wasn't ready to leave the nest, that's for sure. The hardest part was saying farewell to my sisters. It felt like I was losing a part of myself. But at the time, being away from Clemency and Mildred was for the best. I never wanted to be a bad influence on them. I hoped life would get better once I'd grown up. Oh, how naive I used to be. Things only got worse. I had no joy in my adult life, except for my short-lived marriage.
Your husband's name was Benjamin, right? He came up a couple of times in your police report.
My Benny. He and I had joined a street gang around the same time. We were both teenagers when we met. Two foolish kids who grew up together around the wrong people. But by the time we reached 25, Ben and I were tired of that life. We decided to get married and have a small ceremony, just the two of us. I wouldn't have had it any other way, though. It was perfect.
So, you and Benjamin walked away from your gang?
We did, and after our wedding, we hoped to lead a peaceful life in the countryside. But we needed money for a fresh start. It was our attempt to acquire some that got us arrested.
Your police report mentioned you were incarcerated for drug possession.
Well, things went sideways. We'd hoped that my father's family could spare us some cash. They were pretty well off. Instead, we got a batch of drugs. Nigel insisted that if you want something, you have to earn it. Ben and I could sell his product and keep the profits, as long as we gave him his commission. But dealing drugs is a risky business. There was this goon who went after us and caused a ruckus. It caught the attention of the police, and we were arrested.
What happened afterward?
Ben and I were sent to different prisons, but even while separated, we had each other's backs. We kept in touch by writing to each other. His words alone were enough to get me through the first months in prison. But one day, the letters just stopped coming. Deep in my heart, I knew something had happened. And my fears were confirmed when I got a visit from a prosecutor. Ben had been killed in prison.
My condolences, Georgiana.
Thank you for your kind words. I could have done with more of those back then. Back then, I was even robbed of any peace to grieve for my late husband. The other inmates made sure of that. It was truly my darkest hour.
Did you have anyone to support you during that time?
At the end of my first year in prison, Dad resurfaced in my life. I couldn't believe my eyes when he came to visit me in prison. Until that moment, I hadn't realized how much I'd missed my dad.
I imagine you had a lot to catch up on.
After more than a decade apart, we had a lot to talk about. He told me about his life. Honestly, it was as much of a mess as mine. After prison, he wasn't just shunned by our family, but also by everybody he used to know. Like father, like daughter, I guess.
Was he ever tempted to return to the Warren family?
Not once. Regardless of his hardships, my father remained committed to living a life of integrity. And he wanted me to do the same. His unwavering moral support during my time behind bars kept me from straying. It was thanks to his advice that I was able to get out of that nightmarish place in the end.
I'm sure he was happy for you.
That joy was short-lived, I'm afraid. When he discovered I was being blackmailed into working for his cousin, it shattered him. He had to witness his daughter being dragged into the very life he desperately tried to escape. That took an unbearable toll on him. He suffered a stroke shortly thereafter.
You've been deprived of happiness for too long, Georgiana. I hope you can find some here on Isla Esperanza.
People like me don't deserve to be happy, Mr. Navarro. There's a heavy burden I carry on my shoulders. A dark secret from my past. And after everything you've done for me, I owe you the truth. I've killed a person.
You've committed murder, but that wasn't mentioned in your police records.
That's because it was in Benjamin's file. My dear Benny took the blame and was arrested for a crime he didn't commit.
Georgiana, tell me what happened.
Remember the goon who caused a ruckus? I didn't tell you the whole story about him. We thought he wanted to buy some drugs from us. You know, business as usual. But the bloke came to rob us, not to buy from us. Of course, Ben wasn't about to let us get mugged. That man didn't hesitate for a moment. He started beating the hell out of Ben. I tried to interfere. But I just got knocked away. I knew that if this continued, my Benny would have been killed. So I grabbed Ben's knife and stabbed the man. Mr. Navarro, I never wanted to take his life.
Georgiana, you were only defending the man you loved.
Yet killing someone ate away at my conscience. I froze in panic when I realized what I'd done. It was up to Ben to keep his cool for the both of us. He threw the corpse into the river and intended to drive us out of London that same night. But someone saw him disposing of the body and reported our number plate to the police. It didn't take them long to find us.
Tell me, Georgiana, was Warren responsible for any of this?
Years later, I found out that Nigel had sent that bloke after us. After I left prison, he approached me with pictures of me murdering his men. That bloody bastard threatened to send it to the police if I refused to work for him.
I can't believe he would go that far just to blackmail you. That seems too much, even for Warren.
The bloke was only supposed to steal the drugs, so I'd end up being in Nigel's debt. I imagine the pictures were going to be used as proof that I was selling his dirty product on the streets. With such evidence, that monster would likely have coerced me into the family trade much sooner. But that brilliant plan backfired, of course, when his man snapped and tried to kill Ben.
So, he waited until you were out of jail to finally make his move. Only a filthy individual like him would use a situation like that to his advantage.
I should have let Nigel go to the police and dealt with the consequences of my actions. But I couldn't face prison again.
Instead, you had to suffer through all those years working for him. Isn't that enough punishment for a lifetime?
I don't think that atones for my sins. I'm a murderer, Mr. Navarro. Are you willing to have one in your employment?
Georgiana, you shouldn't keep blaming yourself for what happened back then. It's not the past that defines us, but the future we strive for. You're a good person. The remorse you've shown is proof of that.
I hope I can live up to your expectations, Mr. Navarro.